We now begin with the first session of the day. Ancient classical Indian texts on statecraft or warcraft and strategy are rich in concepts and vocabulary. However, as in the discipline of international relations, most of the present literature on strategy, warcraft is Eurocentric or Western. A creation of suitable vocabulary for relevance has been an ongoing effort which began with MP-IDSA's project on Indigenous historical knowledge by publication of 4 volumes on Kautilya by over 24 scholars from 2012. Over a decade now, the Indian Army for the military history paper for staff college examination includes Kautilya. Ladies and gentlemen, this panel discussion on Udbhav, India's indigenous historical knowledge with international and national scholars will be a forum which will survey and audit the work. Based on the findings, what needs to be done in future in a very methodical manner. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming on stage our esteemed panelists for this session. Brigadier Nick Sawyer, British Defence Attache to India, British High Commission. Please welcome him with a huge round of applause. And our other panelists as well. Professor Vasileios, Syros, Distinguished Fellow, USI-CMHCS. Colonel Vivek, Chaddha, retired, Research Fellow at MP-IDSA, working on the Mahabharat. Colonel Pradeep Kumar Gautam, retired, Rohit Kumar, a research scholar. And to conduct this session, I would like to call on stage Dr. Deepshikha Shahi. Deepshikha Shahi is Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at the O.P. Jindal Global University. Her research interests revolve around the theoretical frames of global international relations, non-Western intellectual resources, and Indian politics. Over to you.
A very good afternoon to all of you. It's my pleasure to be here as a moderator for the first session. We just heard about how the Indian Army and USI of India has launched Project Udbhav through Center for Military History and Conflict Studies to study the evolution of indigenous military systems, understand ancient Indian strategic thought, develop and propagate a strategic vocabulary rooted in Indian culture and philosophy to promote Indian soft power in world politics. As an extension of Project Udbhav, we are having this panel discussion. We have some outstanding panelists. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Brigadier Nick Sawyer. He is the UK's Defence Advisor in New Delhi. He is a graduate of India's National Defence College and the UK's equivalent, the Royal College of Defence Studies. Commissioned into the Royal Artillery in 1994, Brigadier Sawyer has extensive international service, including with the Indian contingent of the UN mission. So I now request Brigadier Sawyer to please begin with his talk.
Sirs, good morning. You're probably wondering why a white Anglo-Saxon senior officer from the British Army is standing here talking about ancient Indian philosophy and strategy. Well, I was lucky enough in 2021 to attend the National Defence College here in New Delhi, where I did my MPhil thesis on Kautilyan strategy and developed a strategic toolset for use in contemporary hybrid scenarios. I also completed the UK's Royal College of Defence Studies course on strategy in 2018, where I did a dissertation on behavioural economics in strategic decision-making. So I would like to offer today some thoughts comparing and contrasting Western, let's call it Clausewitzian strategic approaches and Indian Kautilyan strategic approaches. The first point I would like to make is that both systems are still classical ends, ways and means approaches that seek to create decisive advantage in dynamic, complex adversarial environments where conflicting, confusing and uncertain information is commonplace. In this respect, strategy is no different today than it was 2,000 years ago, and so we should not be at all surprised that the ancient texts still have relevance today. Secondly, the modern discipline of behavioural economics is bringing scientific rigour to the study of how the human brain works under stressful strategic decision-making conditions. Again, our brains today are exactly the same as they were 2,000 years ago, and so the wisdom of ancient philosophers like Kautilya is still of great interest and of great relevance today. But now I would like to concentrate on the differences between Western and ancient Indian strategic cultures. I think most strategic practitioners would recognise that there is a very strong national identity and culture that influences the way governments and their armed forces tackle complex problems and crises. So it actually seems very strange to me that governments would use an alien and foreign cultural approach to strategy rather than one that is coherent with their national identity and culture. I've served in over 50 countries around the world, and much of my time has been spent training foreign armies. It is very clear to me that at the operational and strategic levels, Western doctrine is just too different for some cultures, and they cannot adapt in an effective manner, in the same way that certain cultures are just unfathomable to Western minds. And let me give you a really, really simple example when it comes to driving. So for a Western mind like mine, driving in India is just unfathomable. I can't understand how it even works. And equally, my Indian friends that go and drive in the UK can't understand how it works there. That's a very simple example, although my wife is now very, very good at swearing in Hindi when she's driving round Delhi. So it's important that governments and armed forces adopt a strategic approach, a strategic identity that is coherent with their national identity. And I would make the point that there is no right or wrong approach to strategy. Leaders must adopt an approach that works for their own unique situation, culture, and identity. And I'll say that again because I think it's so important, is that leaders must adopt what is right for their particular situation, identity, and culture. Therefore, I applaud the USI and others for generating interest and discussion in reintroducing, and I say reintroducing, an Indian strategic identity and culture to the defence and security discourse here in India. So very quickly then, what are some of the key differences between Western strategic thought and Kautilya's views in the Arthashastra? Let's first look at end states. So Western end states tend to be linear, scientific and physical, and based on the Westphalian concept of nation-states, lines on a map, and the international system where the status quo needs to be maintained. The First and Second World Wars are classic examples of where these physical end states were the goal. Kautilyan end states are much more amorphous, cyclical, cognitive and emotional. In fact, he had a special term or description for these end states known as the Yogakshema. In our context today, we could probably articulate this as the cognitive change required. Note that there is no mention of terrain, armies, economies, or physical systems. If one looks at the major conflicts around the world today, many are about cognitive issues, political control, behaviours, and beliefs. Perhaps then Kautilya's Yogakshema end states are more relevant today. It is also telling in recent decades where the West has been involved in conflict, they have quite often achieved their physical end states, but this has not delivered strategic success. Take the 2003 Gulf War as an example. Physical control did not bring victory because the cognitive elements of the strategic problem had not been addressed. The key question is, would a Kautilyan approach have fared better? And this is a pressing question that elements of this audience should be addressing. Very quickly, because I know I'm running out of time, let me touch on a few of Kautilya's principles and concepts. The first one being the mandala, or rings, and this is probably what he's best well known for. Kautilya requires identification and then analysis of individuals, whether they are key leaders, opinion formers, community beacons, because he recognised that power centres are what are important. You compare this to the Western approach where we homogenise the opposition and give them a convenient label, the Taliban, for example. When it comes to ways and means, there are further key differences between Western and Indian approaches, and I don't have time to go into great detail on this today, but I'm sure most people are aware of Kautilya's upayas and the Sadgunya, which are far more sophisticated and far more intricate than the rather blunt diplomatic, information, military and economic, often known as DIME, that we find in the West. So, in summary, it is my view a mistake for non-Western cultures to try and adopt wholesale and without question Western methodologies. Don't get me wrong, there are times and situations when the Western approach might be the right one, but the skillful strategist will pick and choose the most suitable tools for the task at hand. Therefore, Kautilya is perhaps even more relevant today than he was 2,000 years ago. And I think we can all learn an awful lot from Kautilya, the Arthashastra, and the other ancient Indian texts, because they are so relevant today in the complex hybrid of scenarios that we find ourselves in. I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigadier Sawyer. I think I'll have presentations first, and then when all the presentations are done, we'll make the floor open for Q&A. Brigadier Sawyer made some important observations. At times, we are very skeptical about whether or not we should be using ancient texts for making sense of contemporary realities. We should not be hesitant there. We should be applying symptomatological readings of ancient texts. We can remold, reconceptualize the old concepts, and then apply it to improve the human conditions in contemporary times. Brigadier Sawyer also made a remark that every nation should try to borrow from their intellectual traditions, their indigenous intellectual traditions. But at the same time, it's important to learn from each other because sometimes when we borrow from our intellectual heritage, we become very adamant about our rigid national identities. But I think Brigadier Sawyer also said that while Western scholars and strategists can learn from non-Western traditions, we must also keep an open mind to see how ideas go through cross-fertilization and what synergies can be built theoretically as well as in terms of policy proposals. So thank you, Brigadier Sawyer, for your enlightening talk. I now invite my next speaker, Professor Vasileios Syros. He's a distinguished fellow at USI. He's life member of Clare Hall, University of Cambridge, and holds a concurrent appointment as Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for European Global Studies at the University of Basel, Switzerland. He's basically a historian, and he also explores the arena of cross-cultural leadership. So, Professor Syros, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here at this venue to present some of my ruminations, reflections on this great project, Udbhav. As a Greek national and as an expert in Greek classics and their reception, I find myself at home at this wonderful think tank, the oldest and most premier, most foremost think tank in this country, the USI. And it's been a privilege for me to be part of this wonderful project, thanks to Colonel Gautam's inspiration and all the other core members of this group who have evolved and being my family members. I feel at home at the USI, and this project is for me existentially very important. And I'm enjoying every day, every single day I'm living in this country. So as an expert on the Greek classics, as a neophyte, this is a Greek word for someone who learns about something new, a neophyte. I've learned a lot about the Indian classics through my engagement with the group and the research team of Udbhav. And of course, the classics, as Professor Shahi said, are the distillation. They encapsulate very important lessons about leadership, about major problems, key questions we're confronted with today. Of course, there's always a dilemma. There's always the question whether we need to go back to the classics to understand the modern world. And it's like the same question as, let's say, why should we go back to Aristotle and use horses instead of using a Ferrari? That's a good question, but the thing is that there are perennial problems, enduring questions that have occupied political thought, statecraft, strategic thought throughout the centuries. And I think that the Indian classics are a very rich reservoir of thoughts, reflections regarding these questions. So Udbhav has done a great job analyzing, promoting new readings of those sources, of classical sources in the Indian tradition, and bringing to the fore the need to craft, to forge a new vocabulary, a distinctive set of concepts and ideas that emanate from the Indian classics. But at the same time, one of the major strengths of this project, and this is my modest contribution to this agenda, to this program, is the comparative reading and exploration of political thought across different civilizations and traditions. And the main framework of the project is, of course, the Indian tradition. We have Kautilya, the Indian classics, we have other sources, but at the same time, we're trying to explore the evolution of those concepts and ideas through comparative readings with other traditions. And of course, the Greek tradition is a big elephant in the room. The Greek tradition lends itself for comparisons with the Indian tradition, and we have a number of sources that can be compared with the Indian classics. We had a series of events this year about Udbhav and about where we presented the first preliminary insights derived from this project, and we had a number of presentations that focused on comparative approaches between the Indian and Greek classics. And I would say that one of the major insights I derived from those workshops and my interaction with Colonel Gautam and the other members of the group is the very fact that we have a notion of statehood that permeates, that informs the Indian and Greek traditions. In other words, we do have works written for leaders, handbooks, manuals, mirrors for princes, that are written, that are addressed to specific rulers. But at the same time, we have a distinct notion of how the state should operate. And this is a very important concept that is very modern, very contemporary, very global. We have deeper separation of power, we have different sources of political authority, we have the keen awareness to delegate power and to coordinate the different parts of the different sectors of the state. For example, we had a very interesting conversation, one of the seminars, about Aristotle's politics and how Kautilya, for example, presents a full-fledged political entity, and he dissects, he analyzes the different parts of the body politic. So in addition to that, I feel that the project itself, the core of the project, the nucleus, is of course the Indian tradition, but at the same time, we can start building a larger agenda that will operate across, like, say, concentric circles. So we have the core, the Indian tradition, but then we can expand and introduce more traditions. The first could be, for example, the Greek tradition, but at the same time, we could operate, we could venture, we could engage in comparisons with other traditions like the Chinese tradition. And I myself, as a historian and as an expert in political thought, have been working for some time on Kautilya and the Bible and Aristotle, these three major traditions, the Jewish, the Indian, and the Greek tradition, and how the state is prefigured in those sources. So we have the Bible, the state of David. That's a very interesting account of a very complex political entity. We have Aristotle's politics that is inspired by the political organization of various city-states in Greece, and especially Athens. And we have, of course, Kautilya, who presents the different parts, the different sectors of the body politic, the so-called limbs, the organs of the body politic. Now, in addition to the academic balance of this project, this is, of course, internally a very important endeavor and academically very rich, very innovative. I feel that, as Professor Shahi said, this is a major instrument of exercising soft power in the Indian context. So in other words, India has this very rich tradition of statecraft and strategic thought. But the question is whether other nations are aware of the importance of this tradition and whether they're willing, they're keen to engage in comparisons with this tradition. So I think, in other words, Udbhav can potentially evolve into a major tool of exercising soft power, of exuding soft power, that will highlight, that will showcase India's distinctive contribution to the global history of political thought. Now, of course, as we discussed in the past, our concept of political thought has been shaped, has been conditioned, determined by a set of Western tools, approaches, and concepts. So the question is, to what extent can Udbhav contribute to reconfiguring the canon, introducing new sources, new classics, and crafting new tools, new concepts, new approaches that will help us look at the evolution of political thought in a global context. And again, I think one of the major deliverables of this project is the effort to challenge, to question the predominance, the monopoly of the Western Eurocentric approach to political thought and international relations or strategy. And that will help us also bridge the gap, as B.G. Sawyer said, between a Western approach to strategy or warcraft and other traditions of looking at these questions. The final point is that, as I said, this project, I'm in a sense in charge of the Greek component of this project, and I feel that this project has broader ramifications in terms of how India and Greece communicate and converge in new readings of the Greek and Indian classics, respectively. As you know, Greece is in a process of soul-searching in some ways. India is also rediscovering its own indigenous tradition, its own wealth in statecraft and strategy. So in a sense, both nations are in the process of rereading, reconfiguring their canons, and looking at their position in the world. And over the past 6-7 months, there have been major efforts to bring together these two nations, to promote collaboration in different sectors between Greece and India. So I think that the Udbhav can be one of the major platforms or channels that can help promote communication between Greece and India, especially in the context of rediscovering or reconfiguring their own distinct traditions. Now, the question is, to what extent can those new readings help us understand the world, help us find solutions to major problems? And I do feel that India has the potential at this stage, at this juncture, to offer new alternatives, new solutions, new readings of major sources that can help us rethink some of the problems that tantalize the world today. I do believe that India and Greece are, in a sense, rediscovering themselves after many centuries. They're meeting. There's a major encounter of these two great civilizations. And of course, we both, India and Greece, have a shared commitment to democracy, democratic principles and values that shapes our own understanding of our own classics. So the question is whether this major project, Udbhav, can help us propose solutions, new readings that can help secure a more peaceful and prosperous future for the entire world. Thank you very much.
Very interesting points made by Professor Syros. We are trying to enhance not only the Indian soft power by excavating insights from Indian intellectual traditions, we are trying to add to the global soft power. The context is global, as rightly mentioned by Professor Syros. The idea is to highlight the limitations of Western-centric ways of theorizing things, Western-centric ways of dealing with the global crisis situations. But when we bring in insights from Indic traditions or any non-Western traditions, we are not trying to replace or condemn whatever we have learned so far from Western heritage. The idea is to add the missing elements. There are certain elements which are missing in the existing Western-centric literature. So how we can enhance the relevance of that literature by expanding our cognitive horizons. Professor Syros talked about the possibilities of cross-fertilization between Aristotelian and Cotilian thinking on statecraft. In fact, as part of Project Udbhav, we also wrote an article on how Adi Shankaracharya's thinking on monism or non-dual thinking about reality in general can be applied to contemporary world politics, and how it has overlaps with pre-Socratic Greek thinker Parmenides. So there are multiple possibilities. We have not explored everything at this stage, but in future we look forward to come up with more interesting insights which are not just philosophical and abstract, but also concrete and applicable to deal with real-life crisis situations. I now invite our next speaker, Colonel Vivek Chaddha. He has worked as an infantry officer from the Maratha Light Infantry Regiment before seeking premature retirement to pursue his interest in writing. He was part of the team that worked on the first sub-conventional doctrine of the Indian Army and undertook 2 fellowships with the USI while in service. Consequently, he got the opportunity to work with the K. Subramaniam-led task force on global strategic trends. Colonel Chaddha has written 7 single-authored books, and he's also a senior fellow at MP-IDSA. So, Colonel Chaddha, I now invite you to begin with your talk.
Thank you. At the outset, I'd like to thank USI for this opportunity. I've had an old association with USI in terms of my research interests, probably not as old as the Mahabharata, but fairly old. As old as when I did not need to color my hair as I did before I came here. So I guess that's fairly old. Now, what I'd like to tell you today is my journey in terms of the study into the Mahabharata. I'm aware that when we talk of Indian strategic culture, it tends to get limited to certain texts. I was intrigued by this text for a very long time. And I often wondered as to why it has not been one of the primary principal texts that has been the basis of Indian strategic thought. I'm yet to get my answers. It's part of my endeavor. I'll share some of the core foundational thoughts that have guided this study, also some of my preliminary findings. So that's what I'm going to do today. May I have the presentation? In the meantime, till it comes up, what I intend to do today is just indicate to you as to what is the scale of the Mahabharata itself as a text. I will tell you why possibly it's interesting and important to undertake a study on it. Thirdly, I would like to look at how exactly I'm doing the needful as far as this study is concerned, and some preliminary findings. Next, please. Next. All right. Here's a jumble of certain data for you. And I thought this made interesting reading because it has certain figures which define the scope of the work that is at play. If you look on your extreme left, as you see the screen here, you have figures of 8,800, 24,000, and 1 lakh. So the Mahabharata, as we are all aware, is an iterative text. It was conveyed verbally to begin with. When it was initially written, it was in the form of what was called Jaya in 8,800 verses, moved to something that was subsequently called Bharat in 24,000 verses, and thereafter ultimately in its eventual form, which was about 1 lakh verses in terms of the size, and it was then called the Mahabharata. Now, because of the scale, size of the text, and not only that, because of its diverse publication, translation into multiple languages over the centuries, what people found post-independence, or rather in fact pre-independence, was that there was a need to somehow try and bring together what they called a critical edition. So you had 1259 different texts which were collected from all over the country, brought together at the Bhandarkar Institute in Pune. And the institute in 1919 began a journey, that's the next set of figures that you see on the screen, to try and distill what they could call the critical edition. And it was only in 1966 that they could come up with this critical edition in Sanskrit. And thereafter in 1970, when the Hari Vansh, which is a kind of additional part to the Mahabharata, not necessarily considered an immediate part of it, that translated completed in 1970. So that was the massive scale of the translation and the bringing together, synthesis of the different texts that was available, that was undertaken. It's divided, of course, into 18 parvs, chapters, or 100, depending on how you look at it. It's actually not 100, it's 95 if you don't look at the Hari Vansh. But that's the division in terms of the chapters that it has. In terms of the shloks, you have again two figures there, one without the Hari Vansh and one with it, which is well over 70,000 in both cases. It's 4 times the size of the Ramayana and 8 times the size of both the Greek mythologies put together, the Odyssey and the Iliad. So this is just to give you an idea of what the scope of the study is. I completely understand that. And I don't know if that was one of the reasons for this not becoming an integral part of a study that was undertaken from strategic perspective. There are multiple interpretations of the Mahabharata from every possible perspective, whether you look at philosophy, you look at spirituality, you look at social issues. The strategic issues, to my mind, were yet to be completely explored. Next, please. Now, if you look at why it was required, at least those are the questions that I posed to myself, and I think those are questions which often keep coming up as part of the discussion that we have on this text. So the first is it really a relevant text? I'll quickly keep giving you the answers here, and I'll come to my preliminary findings in the last slide. It absolutely is. For me, a study of ancient Indian literature, forget about it being incomplete, it is going to be stunted if you do not look at the Mahabharata. It is the only text which looks at all elements or rather, okay, two principal elements, let's forget the others, of both dharma and arth. We've looked at the Arthashastra, it's a brilliant document. It focuses primarily on the Arthashastra, on the arth element of how we've undertake our functioning. The dharma element is referred to in the Arthashastra. It is not elaborated in the kind that is required as a foundation to undertake your arth. Because of which, sometimes people tend to look at the Arthashastra in isolation. Somebody calls it a Machiavellian text. Somebody calls it something else. Because it is rooted in what the Mahabharata says. In many ways, it is an offset, it is a derivative of the Mahabharata. If you read the Arthashastra in isolation, I have no doubts that you're going to get away with a message which is isolationist in its perspective. Machiavelli also couldn't be seen in isolation. He's an element of a larger picture. Now, that is the problem when you look, and I'm not merely talking of the Arthashastra. You look at any other ancient text, these are all closely interlinked, and which is what I found when I went through the Mahabharata, because most elements of the Arthashastra are available in the Mahabharata as well. You talk of Sam, Dam, Bhed, Dand, it's there with illustration in the Mahabharata. And that's just one example I'm giving because everybody is aware of it. The second thing is it authentic? Look, the Mahabharata is a living text. The fact that 1259 different editions were collected and brought together, and they all had their peculiarities, they had all evolved in their own ways, in their own different languages, I think that is not a weakness but a strength of the Mahabharata. It has evolved with you and I. It has evolved over 3,000 years, and it has been prevalent and available through these 3,000 years. And which is why it never was redundant, and it cannot be redundant. It's not a fixed, prescriptive text that is available to you. Right? So the core story is authentic, and yes, there are additions, descriptive parts, which become a part of the whole, which is why it is not called history. It is called itihas, and itihas not in the historical sense. So it's a text which is based on facts with didactic elements meant to draw lessons, and that is the value of the Mahabharata. What's new is the fact that it is complete and comprehensive in terms of its understanding of strategy. It's not about fighting a war. It's not about fighting a battle. It deals more, of course, it does deal with those issues as well and in adequate detail, but it deals more with why war should not be fought, why and how you need to avoid war, what are the disastrous consequences of war, and not, again, merely prescriptive elements related to warfare. Is it a religious text? Absolutely not. The most or the best known element of the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita itself is a spiritual text and not a religious text. So the study of the Mahabharata is not a study into religion. Does it have elements amongst the concept of dharma that relate to religion? Yes. But is it a study on religion? Absolutely not. And the last point, because there are some people in certain online magazines very fond of correlating some of the recent studies and interest in some of these things with the political dispensation which is in power. I think it was mentioned in the introductory text, in the introductory address here, we at IDSA have been doing this for over 15 years. Colonel Gautam has been one of the pioneers in that. So to say that some of these things have been picked up because of certain political consideration is absolutely foolish, and I have no other word to describe it. And I hope somebody picks up what I'm saying and writes another article in that particular online magazine. Right? So I think we are reducing the importance of what we are doing by parochial, narrow considerations, and I think we need to grow beyond that. Next, please. This is my, the parts that I'm covering. I'll just very briefly get into it. The first thing that I'm going to be looking at, of course, the idea of Bharat. And again, I'm going to be accused of the same thing, the debate between India and Bharat. the physical manifestations of what is Bharat, including every physical feature that you can identify with today, is mentioned in the Mahabharata. Most states, either in their name which relates to what is available today or how it was called then, is related to in the Mahabharata. And it was seen as one physical entity in terms of the subcontinent. So the idea of a nation very much existed in the Mahabharata, and it's not once that this is mentioned, it is at 3 places in the text that this comes up again and again. They may not have had the ability, the physical ability to conquer it, but it was certainly seen as one cultural whole. The second element relates to the idea of dharma. For me, this is the foundational thought that not only is the core of the Mahabharata, but it is also the basis of strategic thought as it can be derived from the Mahabharata. I've also tried to look at the idea of finite and infinite strategies, something that was mentioned by the first speaker today. What the Bhagavad Gita talks about is a timelessness in terms of our approach, the lack of boundaries, the irrelevance of who the leader is, rather than being fixated to these issues. Next, does it impact our strategic culture? Yes. Whether you look at it from the notion of Western thought, in terms of how they look at strategic culture, or you look at it the way you want to, it fulfills all elements of how strategic culture can be defined. And for me, the approach that is taken by Krishna is the basis of that strategic thought. Based in idealism, functions through realism. The last, does it have a correlation with the other text? I've already covered it. Yes. It should not be seen in isolation, whether it's the other text or this. Next, please. So here are my key findings. 1, there is a detailed discussion on the idea of India that the Mahabharata talks about. 2, dharma in the Mahabharata is a confluence of history, philosophy, spirituality, and strategy. It is not merely strategy in the ends, means, and ways concept. The infinite approach to soldiering is as relevant then and as it is today. And since, again, there was a talk of hybrid wars, the best is in relation to hybrid wars. It is a definitive understanding of ancient Indian strategic thought. Next, Krishna's approach, and of course I will be working on it in detail, is an ideal way to look at not only India's strategic culture, but also the strategic approach to decision-making in terms of nations. There is both organizational guidance and individual guidance. So the Bhagavad Gita focuses on individual guidance more. Like I mentioned, interlinked with other texts, and the beauty of the text is it by no means suggests or indicates that it is perfect. So there is enough doubt, fallibility, there are mistakes, and there is debate, and there is no hesitation in saying that I was wrong and I need to learn. Every interaction is based on questions, doubts, limitations of the individual, and that is the first step to learning. I'll finish here and hopefully something more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Chaddha. It was a deep contemplation on the notion of dharma, and yes, I think I agree with you that we should not be doing fragmented readings of text. Text cannot be read on in isolation. Like if you want to understand the real meaning of Arthashastra, you have to read Mahabharata too, Ramayana too, because there's an underlying philosophical connectivity which we often omit, and therefore we come up with wrong conclusions. We, for example, label Kautilya as Machiavellian or immoral. So the moral, dharmic elements are not foregrounded properly. I think there have been some explorations on Mahabharata, like we have a book by Deepshikha who talks about how Mahabharata's notions have influenced so far the Indian strategic thinking. We have Amrita Narlikar who uses Mahabharata as a metaphor to understand India's tactics of doing bargaining and negotiations in trade deals. But yes, a lot needs to be done. It's a very comprehensive text and we have done very little so far. And the idea of of mixing idealism with realism is also very innovative in Indian text, which is a striking thing, because mostly in Western-centric discourses, we juxtapose these two things. We either become realist or become idealist. But Kautilya, or the kind of instructions that Krishna gives to Arjuna, is very much an attempt to combine idealism with realism. So that's very innovative, I think, for Western as well as non-Western learners. I now quickly invite Colonel Pradeep Kumar Gautam. He's a war veteran of 1971 Bangladesh war. He's an honorary distinguished fellow at CMHCS. He has written extensively on environmental security, water, climate change, military affairs, and Tibet. Of course, he's known as the pioneer of explorations on Kautilya in India. He has authored, edited books, articles, and he has also produced monographs on Kautilya's Arthashastra, as well as Kamandaga's Niti Shastra, and recently he has begun his explorations on the Kural. So I now invite Colonel Gautam to share his thoughts on Indic traditions with us.
Distinguished audience, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, USI. Thank you, Manekshaw Centre. My short presentation, I've got some slides, would cover vocabulary, nuts and bolts. Next slide, please. So, my presentation is two parts. First is a summary and survey of present scholarship and literature. I think last 10 years enough has been done, so I'll just give the summary. And then the way forward, the devil is in the detail, the nuts and bolts. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there's a critical mass of scholarship already available. I will not read out the whole slide, but the IDSA, MP-IDSA project, which is on open access, and authors like Deepshikha Shahi, Medha Bisht, Saurabh Mishra, Kadri Kamal, etc., and Michael Liebig, they have written very good stuff based on Kautilya. And there is now an emerging scholarship on global IR, which Deepshikha Shahi, the chair, is pioneering. So I have given an example of a book Lang and Hobson edited, which is the latest book, which takes care of what she said, and so many Sufism also is included, which is very Advaita and other things. So this is the literature which those of you who are interested, please go back, and I'm sure most of you are aware, but you have to be, because the literature is expanding, not on WhatsApp, mind you, but in good publications, which may not be on online. So next slide, please. Oh, this is important. You see, Kautilya was and is always popular in the West as also in China. So two examples, heavyweights like IR scholars from America, like Kenneth Waltz, etc. Ad nauseum they have quoted this. Since Thucydides in Greece and Kautilya in India, use of force and possibility of controlling it have been preoccupation of international political science. And second, we got Brigadier Nick Sawyer sitting here, who got the first prize in the dissertation in the NDC on Kautilya, and his article has been published in the NDC journal. Please read it. So this is already popular, but the problem is the nuts and bolts have not been done, which last 10 years, the devil is in the details. You have to get into the text and not fire anything you said, Kautilya said this, Kautilya said that, fire without any textual proof. So enough literature has been generated. Next slide, please. So here is another important literature. It is comparing, it's called Bridging Two Worlds. It's edited by 4 international scholars. And Amitav Acharya, in the introduction, explains that in the world ordering, nowhere else in any literature, the concept of Chakravarti exists. Then he says that the Sanskrit cosmopolis, you see, the Indian tradition migrated to Southeast Asia without the sword. So that is called Sanskrit cosmopolis. That went to Southeast Asia, and it was based on Buddhism, Hinduism, and other texts. So that is the important idea. And the Greek idea of Hellenization before and after Alexander came much later. So here is Amitav Acharya explaining to the audience. Next slide, please. So here is important, another slide from the same book. the intrinsic value of Kautilya's Arshas has been validated by none other than the Chinese academic, who's a nationalist of a very high order, by the way, international scholar, Professor Yan Hotong, who says how Junzi and Kautilya ponder interstate politics. And Yan Hotong declares, he declares what? Arthashastra provides rich resource for scholars who seek to develop new IR theories. And in no uncertain term, the editor, Daniel Bell, makes it clear and says, Yan concludes that Shunzi's thought hasn't had much impact in contemporary Chinese foreign policy, whereas Kautilyan thought has influenced Indian foreign policy, and his theory can provide rich resources for scholars to develop a new IR theory. So work is yet to be done, but you've made the case has been made. Its sanction is given internationally, including China. Next slide, please. Right. So let's go to modern times. This is the third volume of New Makers of Modern Strategy. First was published during World War II. Second was published in 1986. Third has come out 2 months back. And lo and behold, it is just not ancient, which is, this, by the way, this book is meant for Western authors, Western students, Western scholars, not for India. And it has got 2 articles, 2 chapters. Strategy of Anti-Imperialism, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh and Foreign by Priya Satya, and Nehru and Strategy of Non-Alignment by Tanvi Madan. And in the introduction, what does the editor write? He says, but if Napoleon, who had mastered the use of violence, led his country to ruin, Gandhi, who mostly abhorred violence, led his country to freedom, then surely that tells us something about what qualifies as strategy after all. So this is the summary of literature which is going on, but my recommendation is the way forward. Next slide, please. That is the nuts and bolts. So 2 principles which pertain to Project Udbhav for a goal of universality, which was mentioned by Syros also, of social science aligned with words of late Professor Partha Mukherjee. First is, indigenization is not to be confused with parochialism of social science. Science and parochial knowledge are incommensurate. The process of indigenization, social science has to be consistent with the process of universalizing social science. Quite a long sentence. But the sum is in point 2. Just as concepts and theories emanating from the West can and may have relevance beyond the West, likewise, concepts and theories originating from context other than the West can and may have relevance for the West. Next. So the final slide is universality of knowledge. Last but one slide. So what I have concluded is that the Indic vocabulary, next slide please. Yeah. So this Indic vocabulary needs to be accepted for its intrinsic universalism by other cultures and civilization. You and I are quite impressed, but we have to make sure that your scholarship sort of impresses and it spreads, okay, to the world. So the process of indigenization has to go on that way, and we don't have to be inward-looking, which was mentioned by other speakers also. The second is that the Udbhav has already launched a project in May. That book is about to come out, which is a comparative perspective of ancient Greek and Indian strategic thought. So hopefully by January it will be ready, and that was the first research output of Udbhav. Next slide, please. But real stuff is nuts and bolts for military science, and not the vague IR. Yeah. So this is the last slide. The art, science, and literature of services also needs to link and bridge the academia. All that we now survey has been achieved by scholarship resting more on ancient texts. Military science and strategic thought cannot be bereft of social science and humanities across the globe. This is axiomatic, and research must continue. But the basic structure of the military system, both material and non-material, also must be researched. The project of Udbhav now must focus on the various military systems in historical context. The aim and way forward for research is clear. It is to engage, reflect, and study the indigenous military system and later comparison with other cultures and civilizations. And finally, this study will provide insights into variables that can help today to reflect upon the changing character of war and how to study and absorb the changes in organization and institutions. Next slide, please. Thank you, audience.
Did I hear properly when you said that statecraft is separated from IR, which stands for the academic discipline of international relations? Did you say that? No, I didn't say. Okay. But you made an observation that Chinese scholars like Yan Zutong make a clear statement about how Zunzi has been underexplored in China, but Kautilya has been explored a lot. But the difference is that scholars like Yan Zutong or Zhao Tingyang, who works on another Chinese tradition, Tianxia, they work very closely with the Chinese government. But in India, the scholars who explore Indic traditions, when actual foreign policy decision making is done, their insights, their critical remarks are not received that proactively. This is not a complaint, but this is just a plain observation, and it's for the bureaucrats to decide how to respond to these kinds of differences about the convergence between how scholars think and how strategists actually make policy decisions. We have now reached towards the end, where I invite our last speaker, Rohit Kumar, who has earned his bachelor's in German from Jawaharlal Nehru University and master's in Peace and Conflict Studies and MPhil in European Studies, both from Jamia Millia Islamia University. And he's received Israel government funding to complete a program on identity-based conflict from Bar Ilan University in Israel. He has contributed to several journals, and he's basically a regular commentator on Indian foreign and security issues for the Hong Kong-based Phoenix TV. So, Rohit, please start.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, USI. Thank you, Manekshaw Centre. It's been an honor and a privilege to be associated with Project Udbhav for the past few months. I'm here to talk about Panchtantra. Because the text teaches us through stories, I decided to structure my presentation on similar lines. And since we are addressing contemporary issues and challenges through many little groupings, such as your Quads and Brigs and Mangrove Alliance, I bring you a story from Panchtantra where such a coalition is formed. I call it the Quad of Panchtantra. Before I share the story, I want to ask you this. Do you recall, next slide please. Do you recall the story of doves that were trapped in a hunter's net? After initial panic, the flock gathers their wits and strengths and fly away with the net. They go to a mouse who cuts the net with his sharp teeth and sets them free. The moral of the story, we were told, is that strength lies in unity. Next slide, please. Did you know that this story is only a fragment of a much larger story? And this is the story that leads us to the Quad of Panchtantra, which consists of a crow, next slide please, a mouse, a turtle, and a deer. However, before coming to the story, I briefly want to share the history of Panchtantra. Panchtantra is an ancient Indian collection of fables that was composed to teach statecraft to three idle princes. Indian philosophical tradition sees Panchtantra as a text of Niti Shastra. While we know for sure that Vishnu Sarma composed the text, there are scholarly disagreements about the exact period of the composition. The text is divided in 5 books, written in a combination of verse and prose. It follows a literary technique called frame narrative, meaning stories within stories. Renowned Indologist Patrick Olivelle called it the book of India's folk wisdom. This is the same wisdom that made the then emperor of Iran in 6th century CE dispatch his court's physician, Burzo, to India in search of this corpus. Burzo translated Panchtantra into Pahlavi in the 6th century. His version was further translated into Old Syriac and then in Arabic, which was titled Kalila wa Dimna. This was in 750 CE. The text later drew attention from Europe and was subsequently translated into various European languages. Both the original Indian text and its Pahlavi translation are lost to time, though we can try and access the text through its translations and adaptations world over. Coming back to the story, when the crow sees the doves flying away with the net, he decides to follow them out of curiosity. The crow sees a mouse come out of his well-fortified residence with 100 exits, chew off the net, and set the doves free. Impressed by the mouse's intelligence and unique ability, the crow desires to forge a friendship. After listening to the crow's proposition, the mouse's foremost concern he shares with the crow is that he and the crow are natural enemies. How can there be friendship between the food and the eater, he asks. The crow assures the mouse that eating him will only fulfill momentary hunger, whereas having a virtuous ally will be, by his side, will be beneficial for life. The mouse then asks, why form this alliance when there is no necessity or crisis? One should unite with the righteous people at the first sight, answers the crow. Next slide, please. What if one of your friends would harm me? Inquires the mouse. The crow convinces that any friendship that would cost him a virtuous friend like the mouse is not worth having. After probing the crow's intention and rationale behind the alliance, the mouse agrees. They quickly become close friends like fingernails and flesh, with the same friends and foes. Sometime later, a drought strikes and food becomes scarce. The crow and the mouse decide to migrate to a lake where the crow's friend, the turtle, resides. Upon their arrival, the turtle receives his guests hospitably and invites them to make this their new home. As they were conversing, they encounter a frightened deer who came forward towards the lake after evading some hunters. The turtle offers water to the deer to drink and bathe. Amused by the trio's camaraderie, the deer joins them. That day onward, they would gather every afternoon under a tree and discuss various learnings. One day, the deer did not come, and his uncharacteristic absence worried their friends. The crow takes a bird-eye view, quite literally, and finds the deer not too far from the lake, entangled in a snare. He comes up to the deer and asks how he got himself into that mess. This is not the time for criticism, my friend. Please hurry and bring the mouse, responds the deer. Crow acts promptly and brings the mouse while the turtle follows them. As the mouse cut the snare, they see a hunter coming towards them. The deer and the crow and the mouse quickly found somewhere to hide, but the turtle could not. Shocked hunter, the hunter was shocked to see his snare cut into pieces, but thanked his fortunes for bringing the turtle to him. He ties the legs of the turtle to his bow and starts to walk away. Overtaken by the grief and heartbreak of losing the friend forever, the mouse begins to lament the fate. Next slide, please. After regaining his composure, he comes up with a plan. He tells the deer to run forward ahead of the hunter and lie down on the ground, pretending to be dead near a water body. Then he instructs the crow to sit between the deer's antlers and peck on him. He then tells them both. When the hunter sees this, he will leave the turtle and run towards the deer, thinking he is dead. Meanwhile, I'll cut the straps of the turtle. The three carry out the plan to the letter, and the hunter behaved as expected. Once cut loose, the turtle quickly gets into the water, and the rest of the three vanish without wasting any time. The hunter could not believe what he has just witnessed, and fearing for his safety, he rushes out of the forest. Our quad returns to the lake and live there happily ever after. There are several lessons pertaining to statecraft in Panchtantra. I'll highlight a few that were in this story. Panchtantra shows us that a coalition that is born out of heart and not out of fear or profit brings greater prosperity. Successful negotiations require faithfully valuing and addressing each other's concerns. Engaging in discussions beyond the initial mandate enriches and strengthens a coalition. And criticizing an ally in the time of their crisis is futile. In conclusion, I want to say that Panchtantra contains valuable lessons for statecraft as well as individuals. It is imperative that the strategic community pays timely and consistent attention to this text, which has not happened thus far. Although the original audience of the text is the three young princes, the teachings are applicable to the masses as well. While Panchtantra teaches a ruler how to rule, it also informs the masses of the desirable qualities in a ruler. On one hand, Panchtantra warns the ruler that the badly governed state will eventually collapse. On the other, it gives the masses a clear insight into the thinking of their rulers. This is why Panchtantra has survived for so many centuries through more than 200 versions in 50 different languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. We started a little late, so I think we still have 10 minutes for Q&A. Any questions?
Thanks a lot to all the presenters. My name is Rahul. I'm a PhD student from JNU National Security Center. I have a question for Colonel Chaddha. In a country where humanities is not so incentivized, what are the steps being taken to create a pool of human resource, talent, and researchers? And what are the steps being taken to give them access to this material? A similar question for Brigadier Nick. So, what are the best practices available in your country for these kind of activities, since most of the archival material is available there? Thank you.
Any other questions? No? So I think the concerned speakers can respond. You'll have to come here.
All right, two-part question. So firstly, I think there's far greater awareness and an understanding of the importance of social sciences, probably as compared to the past. The fact that we are having this event and the fact that we've had similar forums at IDSA for more than 15 years now would give you an idea of the kind of focus that we have on these kind of subjects. And in terms of accessibility, availability, I think it is the endeavor of a lot of establishments like ours that access to such material should be freely available. So every published material that at least we have on our website is easily accessible, free of cost, whether these are our books, journal publications, articles. In addition, of course, you're also welcome to ask questions in case you have any specific queries related to the areas of expertise of scholars who work at IDSA, and they would reply to you. And of course, our library is a great one, over 65,000 books. Most welcome to come and access it. And plus, of course, we are available there as well.
So I think if I could take it on a step, where should we be going? In the UK, we've got lots of resources. There's lots of courses. There's a Royal College of Defence Studies. You've got the Oxford Changing Character of Warfare Centre. But where should we be going? And you'd expect me to say this as a practitioner, is we have to focus on experiential learning. It's all very well reading the texts and writing essays and dissertations about it, but how do you implement it? How do you make a difference? And I think that's the bit that's missing, certainly in Europe and the UK. And I think this is where organisations like USI have a part to play. But also artificial intelligence can help here by creating rich virtual environments to try and practice some of these ancient techniques in a real world or a simulated scenario. So I think we've got to look to the future in how do we operationalise these texts into the modern world. And I think that's the bit that's is exciting and the bit that we should be concentrating on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have had, I believe, an interesting conversation, and the conversations will continue in other sessions because of the paucity of time. We'll have to wait and stop here so far as this session is concerned. I thank all the speakers and the audience, and yes, now we can begin with the next session. And the speakers are requested to please stay on stage because they need to click a picture. Okay. Thanks.